absolute pro at e-commerce SEO. She's actually running a training course, one of the online training courses at Brighton SEO. So I feel like I'm just kind of tagging along with Maria at the moment, which is good. She's working on a lot of our e-commerce processes at Built Visible and working on some really cool stuff. A lot of what we do at Built Visible is working with a lot of e-commerce clients. So we just have a lot of tips we've accumulated that we just want to share, basically. So there were kind of 4 main topics we were going to cover, which were kind of thin pages, on-page content, internal linking, and site speed were going to be the 3 main areas we were going to cover. And I'll just do a little, we'll both introduce ourselves, I guess. So, hi, my name's Rachel. I'm a new consultant over at Built Visible, a technical SEO consultant. I only started in March, so I've been onboarded to the team remotely, which has been a really interesting experience, but the team is lovely and I'm having a lot of fun kind of getting back into hands-on SEO work, which is what I've kind of been missing for a while, working in kind of a broader digital marketing role. So it's really good to get back to my roots, which are in technical SEO. So some of the key things I really enjoy looking at is kind of web performance, looking at JavaScript, as well as some areas of UX and CRO and how those kind of impact SEO. So that's kind of me in a bit of a nutshell.
Hello, so I work at Built Visible as a senior SEO consultant, where I joined there about 3 years ago now. And I'm basically more on the tech side of things of SEO and mostly specialized on site speed, same as Rachel, and on e-commerce SEO. I work across a variety of clients, but most of my clients are e-commerce. So that's why I kind of specialized over the last few years on this field. And I've been doing some trainings about e-commerce at Brighton SEO. And yeah, so that's me.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome to the 2 of you. I'm so excited to have you with us. And I know that this is a topic that's very, very popular. We always get a lot of questions about it in the community. And the main things that you highlighted as the ones that you're going to cover today are definitely things that we always have a lot of questions about. So for our audience, feel free to write your question as we go in the chat box. We're going to make sure that we have enough time to cover them all after your talk. So I'm going to leave you to kick things off now. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. So just a little bit of an introduction on why we chose this topic. Optimizing for e-commerce websites, optimizing an e-commerce site from an SEO perspective can be a little bit overwhelming because there are so many aspects of it, and the sites are usually quite large as well, so you might be a little bit lost on where you can start. So just remember that sometimes a combination of small things might have more impact than a big structural change, which might take a lot of time to get implemented, lots of resources, or even take longer to show any results. So we've put together a little bit, a few tactics here, which you can do to boost your organic performance from a traffic and revenue perspective. And these are kind of 3 types of opportunities. So we've looked at the stuff that it's going to be relatively easy to implement and won't require too much dev resources, so that you can use these when you like to take off some weight of your dev queue, and especially on difficult times, like maybe this one where you might have limited resources. We also looked at opportunities that will drive quick performance changes and that will contribute to revenue uplifts without having to wait for rankings to build up, which usually take a bit of time. And there's also some opportunities around solving at scale some of the challenges that e-commerce sites usually have to face. So we are going to start by talking about theme pages and on-page content. And we chose this because it's one of the things that e-commerce sites usually have to face. There are a few common issues associated with theme content, like crawl efficiency, for example. Having lots of theme pages is going to have a negative impact on your crawl budget because search engines won't have enough time to spend on your high priority pages, which you actually want them to crawl. Having lots of theme pages usually has like negative negative impact on link equity. So having all the link equity diluted between many pages instead of consolidating in a fewer, stronger pages is going to affect negatively the rankings of those of your pages. And there's also common scenarios with cannibalization, where multiple pages will be competing with each other for the same keyword. This is something that happens quite a lot for e-commerce sites, and it results in lower rankings. So it's definitely one that to get to solve and get right. So these kind of these three issues have consequences, like pages disappearing from search engine results pages, or even in the worst case scenario, penalties from at the back of Google algorithm. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is content snippets on product listing pages. So it's really common to see this kind of content copy on category pages. Is the one highlighted in the red square on the right. So e-commerce stores usually, in order, like, it's quite common to have product listing pages that are very similar to each other. So many e-commerce stores have been adding these content snippets to kind of give Google a little bit more indication on what each page is targeting, make them a little bit different, and make those pages a little bit more relevant to their own topics. So this can be a really good way of doing this, but we've noticed that in many cases we've come across a few, like lots of scenarios where this had been implemented incorrectly, and this has ended up with this content not being indexed by search engines. So something that we've noticed actually with a couple of our clients quite recently is that the content was found on the raw or HTML on both desktop and mobile versions, but when it comes to the rendered version, the JavaScript rendered version, the desktop page was fine, but the mobile one didn't have this content. So this content, like as you can see here on this image, there's a read more button here, which is quite common, and it's actually the right way to do it. But if you look at the code below, by inspecting elements, you can see how this content is not visible, is not there when you land on the page. So actually this content was found on the HTML, but when you land on the page, the rendered version didn't contain it. So Google wasn't able to actually see this, and they were not indexing this content at all. When we noticed, just a simple fix that our developer wrote the code for this client, for this particular, for one of the clients, our developer wrote the fix. It took him an hour. The client implemented on the same day, and straight after, all the efforts that we had been doing on page, which on this copy, because we had been spending quite a lot of resources on this, like optimizing this copy, but we wouldn't see any benefits. And right after this fix, we started to see our rankings increase, even for transactional queries. So if this is done incorrectly, this could be one of the a quick win for you as well. So the correct implementation actually would be having this content on both versions. So on the rendered version should contain the whole content, as you can see on this red square here. So the read more button is still in place. It's okay to hide it with this kind of tags, because obviously you don't want to have all this chunk and disrupt the user journey and bring your products down. So you still want to have this collapsed and kind of hidden, but the content has to be loaded. So you can see here the difference in the code between this one, which has the whole paragraph in there, and the previous one, which didn't have the content. So there are a few ways in which you can check if this is correctly implemented on your site. So the first one would be by checking this with developer tools by inspecting the element as I just shown. But you also need to check in Google Search Console using the URL inspection tool to make sure that that Google can crawl this content. So just do a live test and see if they can actually read, if they are actually reading this content, because they cannot read any content that it's hidden behind a click interaction. So if your content to be loaded, it requires a user to click on the read more button, then Google won't be able to access it. And then the other way to do it is there are many extensions, many browser plugins that you can use. The one I use is View Rendered Source, which shows you basically on the left the raw HTML code, then in the middle you have the rendered version, and then on the right you have the difference between two versions. So you can see whether your content is in all of the versions or not. So ideally you want it in both versions. And because you are probably on mobile first indexing, this is really important that your mobile pages, because this kind of problem is usually happening on mobile where you have this content hidden. So check those, because nowadays pretty much everyone is already in mobile first indexing. So just a small note on something, there has been a lot of discussion on how much impact this kind of content can have on transactional pages, because there's many people who believe that this content is not going to help any transactional queries to rank any better, because it's kind of made for, created for SEO purposes. So we actually saw improvements for both of our clients, and it was quite clear, it was right after this implementation, and it was quite clear that it was this fix that brought those uplifts. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen to your site as well, because this can have, this will vary, impact will vary from query to query, page to page, and side by side. So you will have to see if that's you will have to test on your own pages. One thing that you can also do is using the custom extraction in Screaming Frog to the tool to extract content snippets. So if you've been if you already have this feature and you just want to know to audit this, and you want to find maybe content snippets on your category pages that are too small, too thin, that only have a few words, or that are empty and they don't have any content, you can extract this with XPath. Using Screaming Frog. So what you can do is basically, so try putting element, find the class name of this container. So you can see it here at the top and here on the code as well. And the pink text on the left is actually the text, the class name. So just insert this formula on the content extraction tool. And then when the crawling finishes, you will be able to see something like this. So you will see a column which has extracted all your content snippets. So export it to Excel, and then add a column next to it for counting the words. So I have added here the formula. There are a few formulas you can use for this. This is the one I used to count the words on a text. And that means that then you can see the length of these content snippets. You can filter the ones that are very short or that are inexistent, and then optimize them, making longer, and just make sure that they are basically optimized from an on-page perspective. You can use this tool as well to find product listing pages which are very thin, which are also a bad source of thin content and bad user experience. So I'm talking about product listing pages with only 1 or 2 products, which will end up which will result in probably lost sales. And when these happen at scale, it's going to have a negative impact on your revenue. So using the same example, the ASOS category this is the formula that you can insert. So you need to find the class name. In this case, we want to extract the number of products on this page, and then you just insert it on the custom extraction tool here. And the result, when the crawl finishes, you will get something like this, a column with all the content extracted. You can export in Excel and just see which theme category pages you have. And finally, you can also, if you don't have a product count at the top of the category page, you can still do this by counting the number of product snippets on a product listing page. So the process is very similar, but in this case, you just need to get the div where the div class where of the product snippets. Basically, the formula for this case is here, and it's pretty much the same process. And finally, there are also many other uses of XPath for e-commerce. Like, for example, you can extract the price of all your product pages. So you can get the H1s, H2s, or many other like titles, many other elements. I have added a table here, but there's a link here where we have a cheat sheet expressions of XPath uses for SEO. So feel free to have a look, because there's many things you can get from a site crawl with this.
So just a couple of things to add to what Maria's run through in terms of identifying thin pages. There are actually a few things you can do to enhance the quality of your product pages and category pages with some different implementations. So as well as this, I would also recommend looking at, once you've kind of added in all of this new content, to make sure that it's accessible, crawlable, and indexable. So I'll kind of cover that afterwards. So just an example here. So e-commerce sites face internal and external duplication. Not only have you got other sites scraping your kind of product listing pages and the details there. If you look on the next slide, I took this little section of text and ran it into Google search, and there are about 5,000 pages just using this exact copy. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see that not only is this an external problem, it's an internal problem, right? You've got some sites have potentially millions of product pages. There are no real ways that they can kind of realistically differentiate them from one another. It's really easy to kind of copy and paste manufacturer descriptions across the site to kind of save time. But there are actually a few things you can do to enhance the quality of your pages and make sure they're as unique as possible to provide value in search. So some of the main issues, this is something that Maria touched on earlier on, is that these pages eventually might end up being dropped from the index because you've got an issue of Google thinking that these pages are duplicates unless they have this unique content on them. So this is where we need to kind of go in and think about ways to either do a page level optimization or look at how we can optimize templates to provide more unique value to our users. So one example of this that works out really well is adding unique value with user-generated content. I know if not moderated, this can get out of hand, but when implemented correctly and done well, this can be a really good way of helping you stand out from your competitors and everyone who's kind of scraping your product description content and things like that. And it's a really good way of building community. It's not just about ensuring accessibility for crawlers, it's about kind of building customer loyalty and everything like that. And there are some other examples as well of ways that we can kind of improve content quality. So obviously product reviews is a really good one. And it's not just the fact of having product reviews. I'm sure a lot of you will have those implemented already, but it's about making sure that they're implemented in the right way and in a way that you can really get the most value out of it. Because when done well, the product reviews can actually help you to even rank for longer tail keywords than you might have thought you could focus on with your product detail copy, especially when you kind of look at these specific reviews that talk about, for example, matte lipstick and the way it works, the color, the way it looks in real life. These reviews can be seen as an endorsement by Google. So there are all these really useful signals from implementing these well. You obviously need to support this implementation with the correct schema markup, where we've added a link to that too. And also I've looked at a couple of examples where there are some really cool ideas where you can actually filter reviews by category. So you can really get into the details of particular types of reviews, and that can help open a whole new world of kind of findability in terms of your content. There's a lot also we can do with our templates. So for example, this is where you can add in your unique content. You can also add in templates in your category and product pages with, for example, style guides, video content, related articles, which can also help improve internal linking on the flip side as well. And you've also got things like FAQs and Q&As, which I've got an example of on the next slide. So this is a really good way of not only looking at the technical side of things, but building engagement and community. I really like this example I found where there's not only reviews, but there's a questions tab. It kind of opens up this forum element where kind of new customers, potential customers can ask their questions when they're in the consideration stage of purchasing. And your existing customers have the opportunity to go in and answer questions and kind of reassure new customers and give them that kind of assurance that they need to then purchase. And you can kind of have your customers advocating for you in that way. So these are just a few of examples of how you can open up your website to really kind of make the most of your customers and help them to help you in a way. So some of the ways that we can actually optimize product level content is, this is a method I work on and I would recommend having a look at as well. So it's starting by kind of categorizing your website, looking at maybe the top 20 or so product pages in each of these main categories and subcategories, and then bringing in additional data. So that's looking at your revenue data, ranking and traffic data to assess your priorities. Yeah, Bravissimo is a wonderful client of ours. You've also got Google Search Console data. So then you're able to kind of layer all this data on top of each other to then look at where there are mismatches. So you're looking at areas where you're getting a lot of impressions, but not many clicks. So that kind of shows that Google thinks this page is really kind of relevant for this query, but then you'll have to look at why maybe users aren't resonating with that, why they're not clicking through. Or alternatively, you'll be able to find keywords that have a lot of clicks, which shows that users who find that page really engage with it well. But there's maybe a technical issue, which is why Google isn't able to maybe index that or rank it as highly as it could do. Maybe there's a crawlability issue there. So by looking at this page level analysis, you can really start to dig into kind of some problem areas. So where you can't optimize absolutely every page, which I know is one of the biggest challenges in e-commerce, there's just so much to do. How do you prioritize your work? Well, the slide I mentioned just there's a way of prioritizing by revenue to look at product level opportunities, but you can also kind of lean on your templates as a bit of a backup. But I think there's much more we can do with our templates. So look at ways that you can make your templates more granular. I know a lot of us fall back to the classic product title, pipe, domain name for our page titles, for example. But once we do some closer analysis of our pages, we start to find patterns in terms of subcategories of products. For example, maybe they all share particular product features. Maybe there's a line of moisturizers that have a lot of search volume around a certain size, such as like 100 milliliter bottles. If that's something that is consistent across that category, is that something you can kind of add as a pipe section in your page title and kind of roll that out across that subcategory. And there are other different variables that we can look at, maybe particular product features, maybe there's particular delivery options you offer for different areas of your website. I know not every area of the site might offer discounts or free delivery, so you can kind of tailor it that way, as well as kind of size and color options. And that can also help you to provide a little bit more unique content between the different subcategories. So I won't go into this now, but I would recommend, if you want to look at kind of improving conversion rates on your product pages, there's a really good article one of my colleagues wrote here. I'm sure we'll be sharing the slides around. You can kind of access this link yourself, but there's some really good tips in there around kind of looking at social commerce, gaining user trust, and adding urgency, which I'd recommend having a look at. So we've looked at how to kind of provide more valuable content, but that's not really going to help if it's not accessible to search engines. So it's always worth testing in terms of rendering, because all the work you put in is not going to kind of get the results that you want if search engines can't render it. So I've added a link here to a guide I've written on this before, where I kind of list out my favorite tools for testing rendering on your pages. So for example, you've got URL inspection tool, the mobile friendly test, page speed insights, diff checker, which is a good one, which is the tool I've had used the screenshot of here, where you can kind of compare the source and rendered version in a similar way to the tool Maria showed you earlier in the deck, as well as web page tests and Chrome dev tools. Another thing that's worth bearing in mind, JavaScript isn't the only thing that could be hurting your content. You've also got interstitials. Now, these have been a big thing since around 2017, well, probably before then, but we've had kind of penalties being rolled out. This is a really important thing for Google now, and it's becoming more important than ever. So I don't know how many of you have been reading up on the exciting news of Google's page experience update, that they're going to be including the algorithm in 2021. And that's something I'm going to cover in a little bit more detail at the end of this presentation. But kind of basically, this is interstitials is going to be an even bigger part in the algorithm going forwards in terms of measuring kind of page quality and user experience. So I would always recommend doing kind of some extensive interstitial auditing for your websites to make sure that they are not taking up more of the screen than needed, and as well making sure that it doesn't require kind of user interactivity to close these pop-ups and access content, because we need to remember that search engines aren't humans. They can't interact with pages the same way as we can. They can't kind of close buttons to read content. So you need to kind of have a look at whether or not these features on your site are actually obstructing search engines from accessing them.
So I'm going to move to the next section, which is internal linking. So internal linking is obviously important for every site, but the reason why we wanted to talk a little bit about this is because it's kind of more important for e-commerce sites. This is because e-commerce sites tend to have significantly more pages than other sites, and with those many pages, it's very important that you get like your users can access your deep product pages and users and search engines as well, because you want them to have enough link equity so that they have the ability to rank high for your competitive transactional keywords. So internal linking is usually one of the challenges that e-commerce tend to struggle with, and this is mostly because one thing, the large size of the sites, which I just mentioned, but also because of many CMS page templates limitations. So when you have a deep site architecture, the problem is that the authority gets diluted as if by the time it reaches your product pages, which might be in fourth or probably more click depth. So this will negatively affect your rankings of those product pages, and particularly for those long, long tail queries that you really care so much about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few relatively quick wins and scalable solutions that you can do to solve these weaknesses. So the first one is showing and linking to related products at the end of your product pages. So having a section like for example, there's a few different ways in which you can do this, but sections like frequently bought together or related products or accessories or top-rated items on this category. So all these kind of different features implemented on product pages would allow you to cross-link these deep pages, but at the same time, it will also help you increase the revenue and the conversions, because not every user landing on these pages, it doesn't matter whether they land by an internal link, backlink, or by a result on SERPs. So, but many of the users that are landing on these pages might not be, this product might not be the right fit for them. So you just want to make sure that you give them other options so that they don't leave the site, basically. And but it's important to know that maybe creating these kind of features might take a little bit of, this is one of those that might take a little bit of time at the beginning, a little bit of dev resources, but once you have it implemented, and if it's implemented correctly, in the long term, it's going to require very little maintenance, and you are going to have, you will have had created tons of internal links to your deep pages. So that's why it's kind of a quick win. You can also cross-link contextually relevant categories or subcategories. This will help you increase your site's category level architecture. So this is an example of something that we did for a client as well. So these are some templates. They wanted to add this because it was good for SEO, and we recommended it for different reasons, but they didn't really know how to feature these links on the site. So we got in touch with our designers, and our designers created this template. So they basically used this white space that they had here to insert these links in a way that it would look nice, but it wouldn't bring the products further down the page. So if you're not sure how you can fit this on the page, talk to your design team, because I'm pretty sure they will be able to find solutions to have this added. You can also identify quick wins on your site's internal linking structure. So if you cross-reference crawl data with your GA data for each of your URLs, you will be able to see which pages are not having enough traffic, and whether this is because they are so deep in their, like too deep in the architecture that they are far from the home page, or maybe it's because they have only a few internal links. Try to find patterns and commonalities on weaknesses. For example, you might realize that your brand's pages are too deep in the architecture, and you see that they are having less, like they are struggling to get those rankings. So then you can create an AZ brands page, so that you can add a link on the home page to this page, and then they will be closer to your home page. So yeah, another thing you can do is looking at what products are deep in the maybe some products that are too deep and they are not getting lots of traffic. So then you can use these related products features I was talking about to link to these products that are underperforming, for example. So this is actually quite quick to get, and it's very, very easy. It's just cross-referencing your GA data with a site crawl. So this is an example of something you can do as well. So using if you have already if you have a content section on your site, pick articles that are high authoritative, that have lots of backlinks, or that are the most authoritative, and then link to your high priority product pages and category pages from these. So you can just make sure that you link to transactional pages that are gonna drive revenue, because which is like your product pages and category pages, and try to link to those pages which showed some weaknesses on the analysis I explained on the previous slide. And then something that you can also do is with this data is building like kind of a seasonal internal linking calendar. So if you grab Google Search Console data through the year by month, and you cross-reference this with search volumes and traffic data, you can get, this is an example of a spreadsheet, you can get basically a seasonality calendar where you have certain topics, their peak period, and then you can use this kind of for internal linking purposes as well. So inform your editorial strategy calendar, or you have some content, you can link to this as well. Or for example, we have here dresses is one of the topics, and its peak season is June. So by cross-referencing this data, we can see in column P that we like this, our client underperformed against seasonality. So we were not able to pick up that seasonality with traffic. So then you have here kind of a trendy topic to focus on and optimize ahead of the peak season. I would recommend at least optimizing it a couple of months before the peak season is reached, so that you have enough time to build up the rankings. Yeah, I just explained this, so I'm just gonna hand on to Rachel because we are running a little bit out of time.
Thanks. Just to save a bit of time, so I've kind of gone into the details of some of the areas that impact site speed, where you can kind of have some quick wins in the fact of making the most of the code you actually do have and just kind of trimming that down rather than implementing these kind of new performance methods, whereas those are kind of split across, we've got JavaScript, images, code file size, redirects, and sorry, I'm just going through the slides to trim down, and web fonts as well. So we're going to be sharing those slides so you can kind of go into the detail of those. But Maria, if you'd be so kind as to navigate to the slide that starts with feature proofing your web performance.
Is it this one?
It is the fourth slide from the end. So the one before the page experience diagram.
Yeah, got it.
One. Yes, thank you very much. So just to give you an update on some quick wins I think that we could make in terms of pushing up our rankings versus competitors who are kind of neck and neck with us at the moment. So this is a really interesting factor that's going to play a part in rankings going forward. So in 2021, Google's going to be launching page experience as one of the algorithm signals it uses for rankings. And this is basically going to be focused on user experience elements of speed and performance, rather than just kind of some of your more traditional elements. It's still going to be the fact that query relevance is really important, but you can actually use page experience to kind of boost you up. If there's, say, a tiebreaker where Google thinks that your client site or your site is just as relevant as another site, a competitor, this is where, if you optimize for page experience, this can kind of bump you up and get you ahead of the competition. So basically, Web Vitals has been launched. It was a very busy month in May for Google. They launched Web Vitals and Page Experience. So the core Web Vitals are these three metrics, these newer metrics, which is largest content or paint, burst input delay, visual stability. So those are the core Web Vitals that then will be signals that feed into Page Experience. And this will also be factored in with things like mobile friendliness and HTTPS. But seeing as those things are more kind of traditional elements anyway, I wanted to just take a little bit of time to explore these in a bit more detail. So largest content for paint looks at measuring the time from when the largest text block or image element is rendered on the page. That element is focused on how quickly the kind of user's viewport is populating with meaningful content. And I've included some tips there for optimizing that, including looking at render blocking resources and kind of trimming down file sizes of images just to make sure they're really small, they can kind of load as quickly as possible. You've also got first input delay, which is looking at interactivity. So that basically measures the amount of time from when a user first taps or clicks on something versus when the browser can actually respond. So again, this is where JavaScript can really impact that, kind of when you've got scripts running in the background that are stopping the interactivity from the browser, but the user doesn't know that. And you've also got cumulative layout shift, which is always fun to say. So CLS basically it's not a traditional metric in the fact that it's a second score. It's kind of an overall score rather than kind of in a time measurement. So it basically scores the amount of unexpected layout shifts in the page that occur during the load experience. So this basically is when you see that a page is loading and you've got different elements popping up and shuffling text around and moving text this way and that, which is really frustrating for user experience. So I personally am really excited that Google's focusing on this a little bit more and doing more to help us actually measure that, because it's really frustrating to go to click on something and then everything moves around and you end up tapping on the wrong thing and end up in the place that you don't want to be. So there are some interesting ways that you can optimize for this, such as specifying image dimensions, just to make sure that when the browser's loading the page, it's setting aside specific areas for those images to fit into, so they will kind of populate as and when needed, rather than shifting around the text around it. So luckily, this is something we can start monitoring in Google Search Console now. So there's the new Core Web Vitals report, where you can kind of look at data, how it's like trending on your website in terms of those 3 core Web Vitals there. And so once we're kind of optimizing for these the future proofing of our performance strategies, it's not just about kind of compressing and all of that. It's looking at how we can get ahead of the algorithm update that's coming in 2021. So I think that's a good quick win in terms of getting ahead of competitors and edging them out in terms of rankings. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Wow. I mean, that was quite a lot of insight. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say, you know, thank you for putting all this together. This is super, super detailed. And Rachel, I know you skipped through some of the page speed stuff, but it would be great to have a copy of your slides so that everyone can kind of take their time and absorb through it. But yeah, that was really helpful. We got a lot of questions come through. Let me just go through them. So I'm not sure if either one of you is familiar with Sitebulb, if this is something you've used. Someone had a question around if you know whether there's a way to extract content snippets on Sitebulb.
I haven't actually been in touch with, so I haven't done that with Sitebulb, but I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a way. The way would be probably the same, trying to find for the code and trying to extract the class element. I know I had to rush a little bit through it, but if you have a look at the slides, you will be able to see the formula and extract that pink text and see where in the code it is, and just mimic that for your own page.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Larissa had a little bit of question around. So in your screenshots, you show that you've added text on top of the page. She has previous experience with a company where when they did this, it increased the bounce rate. And in the end, they saw that rankings were affected negatively. So for her, the search intent of these pages is to find the product. So by including text, would your users be less happy with the page? Like, what do you see the best way around that?
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned that the fact that it did work for both of our clients doesn't mean that it's gonna work for everyone else, because obviously user intent, obviously and like what you ultimately care about is the revenue and the conversion. So it doesn't matter if you get those rankings, but then your bounce rate increases massively, then it's not going to have a positive effect afterwards. It did work for our clients, but you will have to test it, and it can even vary from page to page or from category to category. Like maybe you find that on clothing it works, and then on another vertical of yours it doesn't. So you will have to test. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And Rachel, on your point specifically on pop-ups, I had a bit of drama myself, like recently, where the website I work on released the most massive cookie policy pop-up you can possibly imagine. And I panicked for a bit, and I wasn't really sure if that was okay or not. And the documentation I found was very, very, very small. So it was quite good to see you highlight that if it was specifically for cookie policy, then it shouldn't be a problem. But could you just give me a little bit more relief on that? Has Google come out and said something officially?
I would need to look into a bit more detail on their most recent stance on cookie policies and all of that. I mean, it should be fine, but it's just about, I think, quantifying that by just doing some testing with some JavaScript rendering tools, just to make sure that the content is still accessible. I think it's just around that element that if user interaction, for example, is required to close the window or kind of tick boxes to get through, it's just about making sure whether the source code is actually going to be available or not, or whether crawlers can actually access that at all. If it's actually accessible kind of below that and they can kind of access it anyway, then that should be okay. But that's like the main issue there, really.
Yeah, great. And Sabiha had a question around the view around potentially using product images versus product videos on e-commerce site. I imagine that this might highly impact performance, but what are both your views on it?
It's a question for both of us, sorry, or?
Oh, either or.
Okay. So we actually were running an experiment with where we were looking for, because product like it, while videos are gonna impact probably negatively your site speed, it can have a positive impact on conversion. So we don't have the results, but we have run experiments with clients before where we segmented the two types of product pages, one with videos and one without videos, to see if there was a correlation with conversion rates. And we actually saw, I don't have the results in front of me, but we saw that conversions were up.
Yep.
But this wasn't really my experiment, so I'm not sure whether it was worth keeping them because of them, even if it had impacted negatively. So I guess this one is another one for you to try and see, like, if your site speed is really being negatively impacted but your conversion is being positively impacted, then kind of balance it and do like decide based on that.
Yeah, so a lot of testing and experimenting to kind of see how that impacts. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add a quick point onto the back of that, is that something you could look into is looking at using the network information API. So that's a way that you can actually kind of monitor the user's connectivity in terms of their bandwidth and whether they can kind of handle larger resources or smaller ones. And if you, for example, notice that they drop down to like 2G connection or something like that, you can serve a static image. Whereas if they're on 4G, you can actually serve like a video version of that. So that might be a nice little kind of safety net to make sure that users are still seeing some form of content, but that kind of overall load speed isn't going to be impacted too much if they're struggling with their connectivity. So that might be something to look into as a bit of a solution.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And the seasonality sheet that was shared within the slides, Tala is wondering if you could possibly share that with the group. She's keen to see how the elements have been calculated for seasonality and potentially using that in her own work.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I had to rush a little bit into that, but definitely I can create a spreadsheet that doesn't have like a template, basically, so that you can reuse. Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we've got two more questions, I think. So one was from Anna. So this is around duplicate content. So one of her clients has a shop subdomain on their brand site. Both sites have product pages on them. But at the moment, the content is more or less the same. So for example, shop.domain.com with the product and domain.com with the product. So duplication across the subfolder and the subdomain. So she's wondering, what is the best recommendation in terms of dealing with this kind of duplication?
Well, I mean, it's difficult without seeing the site, but it's definitely something that should be dealt with, because in the end, it's two product pages for two different URLs for the same product or for the same category, which is certainly going to create like cannibalization, and both pages are going to be competing with each other. Even if Google is smart enough to realize that it's a mistake, and it might not penalize you because it's not something you've done intentionally, that might be the case, and you might not get this kind of penalty, but still it's going to hurt your SEO. So I'm not sure what's like. I would say if you really, I mean, the best thing would be getting rid of one of them, whether it's the subdomain or the subfolder. There's different pros and cons with both approaches. So which is the right for you, I don't know, because I don't know the site, but getting rid of one of them would be ideal. And I think that's probably the main or the only thing I would recommend. I would definitely don't want to recommend going through like implementing canonicals, because they can be and they will be ignored by Google. So you don't want to rely on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think in my thought as well would be around just redirecting one section to the other to consolidate them and have them all live in one place, because we're basically just splitting the authority across the same type of content in both ends now. Great. So then one final one we had from Anissa. So she was wondering, is there tangible value in adding hyperlinks within the content of category descriptions in PLPs? She said, I believe it helps with internal linking and site architecture, but it can be challenging to make a business case for it, where I can estimate potential money improvement from the tech implementation. So this is all about adding hyperlinks within the content of category descriptions.
Yeah, in terms of building a business case, it's gonna be a little bit difficult. So because I mean that's the case with internal linking. It's not a very easy one that you can of course do forecasting around the keywords that you are gonna, like those linked to pages are gonna target, and then try to estimate ranking uplifts and try to put a number to it. Obviously, which should be taken with a pinch of salt, but it's a way in which you could forecast this. In terms of the value, it's contextual links. They usually have more value than non-contextual links, because obviously the surrounding copy kind of helps for search engines to understand what this link is about and what's the relevant the page about. So they are, in my opinion, they are valuable, but you will have to test as well. And yeah,
definitely. It kind of feels like, especially generally with dealing with large sites, e-commerce tend to be falling under that. There needs to be a lot of time dedicated for experimenting and testing to actually see what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, I think these were all our questions. So I just want to say a massive thanks again to both of you, Maria and Rachel. This was your idea to host this for our community. And this was an extremely insightful, in-depth presentation. So we all really appreciate you taking the time to put it together and sharing your awesome knowledge with us. We're going to be back again next week at the same time with Nikki, who will be doing a session on local SEO. And we will be sharing both the video recording and the slides for this talk by tomorrow at most, hopefully. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And thanks, Maria. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.